diet in IBD. And may I have maybe have the slides? Yeah. Thank you. For chairing this session, we have three very eminent dietitians. We have Dr. Namrata Singh, who is the dietitian at Department of Gastroenterology and Human Nutrition at All India Institute of Medical Sciences. She has a lot of published work in the field. We have Dr. Nancy Sahni, who is a dietitian at the Department of Dietetics at PGI Chandigarh. And we have Dr. Ritu Sudhakar, who again has a lot of interest in diet and inflammatory bowel disease. Over to you, chairpersons. I request you to introduce the speakers and get along with the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vishal Sharma. At the outset, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to be a part of this show. I would, without wasting any time, I would now ask Dr. Pawan Rawal to kindly go ahead with his talk. He is a consultant in the Department of Gastroenterology and Liver Diseases at Artemis Hospital, Gurugram, India. Over to you, Dr. Pawan.
Thank you, Chairperson, for the introduction. At the outset, let me thank my alma mater, Professor Kochhar, Professor Datta, and Dr. Vishal for having me here and giving me this opportunity to talk in front of such an august audience. So the topic given to me was dietary therapy in Crohn's disease. And let me justify in the next 20 minutes or so. Now, why we are talking about this diet issue is because it's an important part in the management and the causation of the Crohn's disease. It has been well proven that the incidence of childhood IBD was less if the child was fed with the breastfeeding in the initial few months. And the incidence of and prevalence of the stricturing and penetrating disease, that's the complicating Crohn's disease, was even lesser in those who were breastfed. The less dietary intake of total fats, the increased ratio of N3 by N6 fatty acids was also associated with the decreased risk of Crohn's disease. There's enough evidence which showed that the high fiber and fruit intake has association with the decreased CD risk and flare. The risk with UC is a little different, and I think the follow speaker will talk about it. There is data regarding the vegetable intakes also. The high vegetable intake decreased the risk of both UC and CD together. A very important finding was the early exposure of these nutrients or the fats was more important than the dietary changes done later in the life. Fish intake as a part of Mediterranean diet actually led to less Crohn's disease risk, and adequate intake of zinc and vitamin D. And well-proven data has shown that there's a less CD risk if they are a good amount in the blood. Then we know the mucosal integrity and the gut health is determined by the microbe, the mucosa itself, and the immune system. And we also know that dysbiosis is a hallmark of IBD. Dysbiosis, along with the impaired mucosal barrier, it leads to mucosal inflammation. Now, diet actually has a key determinant function in the gut microbial community, structure and function both. Mind it, both structure and functions are determined by the diet. And it has been hypothesized that the diet-triggered changes in the intestinal microbiome might cause a pro-inflammatory state preceding the development of IBD. So thus, diet can be one of the intervention as we have the other drugs and immunosuppressive medication in the management of IBD and the further progression of the disease. Now, there are nutritional issues in the Crohn's disease. We know it's a catabolic state. It involves from mouth to anus. Any part of the GI can be involved, especially the mucosa, which is absorpting, that is small bowel, and the hydrating, that's colon, can be involved. So patients of Crohn's disease are considered to be at significant nutritional risk. It is estimated that around 60 to 75% of the patient will experience malnutrition, maybe because of the poor intake, decreased appetite. Because of the increased catabolic rate, there is increased rate of protein turnover. There are losses from the gut, and the losses, they are in the form of nutrients during various phases of the active disease. And prevalence of malnutrition actually will vary if the disease is ulcerative, stricturing, or fistulizing. It will vary with the extent of involvement, whether small or large bowel will be involved, and of course, the severity of disease and the flares as well. Now, common nutrient deficiency would be of the calorie and proteins. Then sometime because of dehydration and small bowel syndrome, then fluid and electrolytes involvement would be there. Then the nutrients, including the iron, magnesium, zinc, calcium, vitamin D, and B12 and folate are the common ones which get affected in the Crohn's disease. Whenever we start the management it begins with the assessment. A very good assessment of the nutritional parameters of the patients are very important. Let me tell you, a trained dietitian has a key role in this. It includes anthropometric parameter, and minded BMI is not sufficient. And as I said, a trained dietitian will have a great role in an all-round assessment of the nutritional functions. It is correlated with the biochemical data, clinical data, and dietary history. There is a very nice review that was published in Journal of Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics in 2020. It highlighted all those parameters we are discussing. We have to calculate the calorie need. And let me tell you, we have to consider previous weight losses also, consider infections, consider the other things once we are calculating the calories. Maybe there may be some adjustment in the children and adolescents because of their growth needs. The requirement will be a little higher. The same thing has to be done for the protein needs. Again, the protein requirement increases by around 150% of the normal recommendations. The factors to be considered again would be the lean body mass wasting, if it has happened, and the measurement of the albumin in the serum as well. So having done that, we have to decide the nutritional therapy. And we know Crohn's disease has a diversity of presentation, from ulcerative to stricturing to fistulizing, then initial phase flare and the relapses. For active inflammatory Crohn's disease, oral diet with high protein is preferred. TPN is not preferred over that. So it's enteral nutrition with oral diet, or the oral intake is preferred. Once the disease is in remission, there is no need of diet modification. Patient goes on diet, restrictions are not required. Once there is a relapse, there was some data which showed that diet would flare it, but as such, the recommendation right now say that there is no dietary component established to cause the relapse of disease activity as of now in patients who were in remission previously. As a usual practice, milk would be stopped, but the guidelines, the data, and the consensus review, the Asian consensus review, which were published in 2019, that told that the milk should not be routinely restricted, as it's a nutritional stuff which should be given altogether. Again, the gluten-free diet is not of a proven value in patients with IBD. Having discussed the inflammatory component, in stricturing Crohn's disease, there is no evidence of recommending either a low high fiber diet, which is usually done in the patients. And the nutritional status of the patient of Crohn's disease should be optimized prior to elective surgery. There is enough data which has shown that patients who were optimized with nutrition before surgery, they performed better than patients who were not. The oral diet and enteral nutrition should be started as soon as the patient can tolerate the diet in the post-operative period. And there is no scientific evidence to recommend probiotics in the food supplements. This is for the management of the nutrition. Other parameters and other deficiencies should be actively looked for, including vitamin D, vitamin E, zinc, calcium, magnesium, folate, thiamine, B12, and iron, and they should be thoroughly supplemented as per requirement. And I thank Dr. Vineet Ahuja group to just have this app recently launched for better management of nutritics in the patients of IBD. Now, coming to the dietary approaches for the treatment and management of IBD. Various dietary approaches have been used. They include the exclusive enteral nutrition, and then there are some exclusion diets we will be discussing further. They include the specific carbohydrate diet, then some exclusion diet, Crohn's disease ED, then some vegetarian diets, and some so-called anti-inflammatory diets as well. Coming to exclusive enteral nutrition, so as the name suggests, it provides the patient with the liquid formula only, and all the oral feedings are stopped. Usually they are carried out for 6 to 8 weeks. And in various studies, they have been demonstrated to lead to induction of remission. We'll be giving the evidence for that in the later slides. They have been shown to actually heal the mucosa. They have a steroid-sparing effect. We'll be discussing later. Patients who were giving exclusive enteral nutrition, especially in the pediatric population, had fewer exacerbation of the disease. And this led to better nutritional recovery in bone health in both adults and children. Mechanism of action, which is putative, is the direct anti-inflammatory effect acting on the chemokines, the TNF-alpha, and other inflammatory parameters. Diet alters the intestinal flora, thus helping in the structure and function. It actually boosts the barrier function, thus the infiltration of the cells decreases, leading to less inflammation, and probably some other effects, including the responses, innate responses, which are also altered by the diet. These are the mechanism of action probably elucidated for the EEN. There is enough evidence, and thus the various guidelines, various societies, including the Asian group, has recommended that EEN, that's the exclusive enteral nutrition, should be recommended as a first-line therapy to induce remission in children with active luminal Crohn's disease, and that including the chronic involvement as well. The data favors Crohn's disease in children. The data is either more available for children rather than the adults. it has been shown that 80% of the naive disease who were newly diagnosed Crohn's disease and 60% of the disease where the relapse was there, they had remission with the EEN alone rather than the drugs. Previous initial systemic reviews and meta-analyses showed that the exclusive enteral nutrition was almost as efficacious as steroid in inducing the remission. There is this open label RCT which showed that giving polymeric formula, the PCDI, that's the Crohn's disease active index, clinical one, the biochemical parameter like CRP, the endoscopic parameter and histological parameter all improved with the exclusive enteral nutrition as compared to steroids. Various meta-analysis and Cochrane review have been published, and the recent Cochrane review in 2019 has shown that EEN is superior to corticosteroid in pediatric CD. Let me tell you, it's pediatric CD where it's superior. Coming to data of adults of exclusive enteral nutrition, the adult studies have demonstrated considerably variability in the efficacy, and the studies are very heterogeneous. The remission rates which were found were lower in children. The data was significantly less as compared to the remission they were achieved in adults. Though it has been shown till now that corticosteroids possibly are more effective than enteral nutrition therapy in remission of adults, but various studies are still ongoing to prove this fact. Possible reasons which were elucidated for the lower response in adult as compared to children were probably the disruption of normal life. The adults were less compliant, they have less palatability, and probably the less experience also was there on part of the physicians or the caregivers, and the guidance also was less, thus ultimately leading to poor response in adults. Having said that, still the data is quite promising. This is a study where they have shown that enteral nutrition, exclusive enteral nutrition, provides an effective bridge to safer elective surgery in adults with Crohn's disease. As you can see in this, the patients who were pre-optimized with enteral nutrition before surgery had less anastomotically abscess and collection. They had less high stoma output later on, and there's less per-rectal bleed as compared to people who were directly taken for surgery. So there's a promising data which has come over here also. Though it's very the small data, but promising data came from Dr. Sood's group, which has shown that exclusive enteral nutrition was actually well-tolerated therapy for induction remission, even in the anti-TNF refractory adult Crohn's disease patients. We require more number of people to be studied upon for this, and thus probably at least the promise is there with regard to the EEN. Some of the practical issues which require discussion are whether there is a change of efficacy of EEN with regard to location. Yes, initially some studies shown that the clinical remission at week 8 and endoscopic activity score were higher at week 8 in colonic disease compared with the ileal and ileocolonic groups, where the EEN was given for 8 weeks. But later on, the observation study refuted this, and it was found that colonic disease is not less likely to achieve remission. Yes, definitely the strict disease, the response was lower as compared to the inflammatory disease. And that's why all the guidelines and societies, they don't recommend EEN as a first-line therapy for the stricturing or complicated Crohn's disease. Now, coming to difference between elemental and non-elemental diet, we all know that polymeric formula are better tolerated as compared to elemental formula. They are more cost-effective as well. And there was a comparison which was made between elemental and non-elemental formulas, and it was found that there was no difference in the efficacy with regard to induction of remission, and thus probably polymeric formula should be the choice. Even it has been found that if we use polymeric formula, the chances that you will require NG tube feeding would be much less, and thus leading to more compliance and better completion of the treatment. Regarding oral versus nasogastric EN, this was compared. It was seen that remission rates were similar at 8 weeks, though it was a little different at 4 weeks, where the continuous one will have the better response as compared to the oral ones. All patients, this was a study in pediatrics, so all patients had improvement in growth and weight. Even the laboratory indices, they become better, and the compliance rate also were equal. So usual parameter is to start the oral feeding, nasogastric only if it is not possible. Now, as per the induction of remission, there's a good data for maintenance of remission as well, though literature is very heterogeneous. There have been systemic reviews of 12 studies, and it was found that enteral nutrition was more effective than the regular diet, and as effective as some medication in maintaining remission as well. Partial enteral nutrition is a little bit inferior, especially when the unrestricted food is allowed. The primary outcome was studied, and the remission rate was lower in the partial nutrition, partial EEN as compared to the complete EEN. Now, this another concept of Crohn's disease exclusion diet in combination with PEN. What is it? Here, the partial enteral nutrition is used. That means 50% of your calories, they come from the polymeric formula, but then 50% is the rest of the diet. But the rest of diet is exclusion diet, where there's an increase in the fruits and vegetable, more complex starches, high quality lean proteins and healthy oils. And you tend to avoid gluten, the dairy, the animal fat, the processed and the canned food as well. Usually it is given in phases, initial phases of 6 weeks, where you actually are very, very strict about it, giving what we have already talked. And in phase 2, you tend to decrease the polymeric formula. And finally, in phase 3, after 12 weeks, you add on the unrestricted food as well. There has been enough data and very strong paper published in Gastroenterology 2019 from the Levine group, where it was shown that at week 6, I mean, even using the most rigorous criteria, the remission rate was 75%. So there's a significant improvement with the CD/ED, and as compared to EEN, it is easy to give as well. A lot more data has been coming up even for the later complicated disease. So this was the data which was published in 2017, where the dietary therapy with Crohn's disease exclusion diet was shown as a successful strategy for induction of remission in children, adults failing biological therapy as well, thus giving the promising results. Coming to specific carbohydrate diet, as the name suggests, it is here some of the carbohydrates are taken away. It was initially promoted by Sidney Haas in celiac disease patients when the things were not very clear about celiac disease. It actually restricts the grains. So it restricts the grain, it gives you whole foods, fruits, vegetable, and yogurts. It also restricts the refined sugars. It restricts other milk product other than yogurts, and food additives are not allowed. Enough studies and enough data which have shown that the clinical and laboratory parameter, they were better. There were microbial shifts. The labs, they improved, the growth improved when the specific carbohydrates were given in case of Crohn's disease. Coming to a few last slides, the CD treat is a diet which actually emulates the EEN. We know that EEN is a total 100% formula feed. If we can replicate this EEN with a diet, that probably will form the frame of the CD treat diet. It actually recreates EEN by exclusion of certain dietary components. Usual diet avoids the gluten and lactose, and it matches the macronutrients, vitamins, and minerals and fibers. Results are favorable. The data is still coming up. There are various studies going on with this CD treat diet as well. Now, we know the data for adults is little less as compared to adults, but more and more publications are coming up. When I reviewed the literature, a lot of publications are coming up. The optimal care pathway have been defined, and we hope probably the EEN or the nutrition and CDE diet will play a significant role in management of the disease in adults as well. We have to push the boundaries, and the data is coming up for that. We have to study the EEN for severe luminal Crohn's disease. We have to see what happens when the diet exclusively is given for longer duration, that is more than 12 weeks. And of course, we need more data on adults. And last but not the least, as Dr. Sood's data has promised, whether this can be used for patients who are refractory to the biologics as well. The ongoing studies are there. We expect results in next maybe couple of years also. So ladies and gentlemen, I conclude by saying that diet plays an important role in the pathogenesis and management of Crohn's disease. Actual nutritional assessment, involvement of dietetics department, and supplementation is must as regard to the nutritional parameters. Nutritional support should be provided by oral and enteral means whenever possible, reserving parenteral nutrition for the patient with intestine failure only. There is enough evidence which supports the use of exclusive enteral nutrition and other diets for induction and remission, more so in children as compared to adults. More robust evidence is required to elucidate the optimal use of enteral nutrition in treatment algorithm in adults. Thank you for the patient listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pawan. The best part was that you finished just in time. And it was actually a very brilliant talk with all, I mean, you covered all the aspects in such a short period of time, which was really very brilliant of you. Thank you so much. And I think we'll take the questions after the second talk. So over to you, Nancy.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Vishal and the organizers to have invited me over in such an important, discussion of the day. And I would now, without wasting any time, I would like to invite Dr. Ramit Mahajan. He's Associate Professor in DMC, Ludhiana, in Department of Gastroenterology. And he'll be talking on diet in ulcerative colitis. So all the diet therapy in ulcerative colitis. Please, Dr. Ramit.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the kind introduction. And thank you, Dr. Vishal and team PGI for inviting us for this very precious conference. Today, I've been given the topic of dietary therapy in management of ulcerative colitis. We all know that IBD is on rise, and over the last 50 years, the incidence of IBD in countries like China, Southeast Asia, and India is progressively on the rise. Reasons behind the rise in IBD are urbanization of societies, associated changes in diet, use of antibiotics, hygiene status, exposure to the antibiotics, and pollution. So the pathogenesis of IBD is very complex. It involves a patient who is genetically predisposed, who has gut dysbiosis, which is majorly because of environmental factors like diet, smoking, antibiotics, and these all changes result in the changes in the innate and adaptive immune response, which results in the development of IBD. Amongst the various environmental factors which I've mentioned, the most important factor is probably the diet. Anne Wigmore once said that the food you eat can be either the safest and the most powerful form of medicine or the slowest form of poison. And it is so true that our diet, which was so healthy previously, 50 years back, has now become an unhealthy diet because of the westernization of diet. We have seen an increase in the intake of sugar, oil, and fats over the last 50 years. And the change in composition of diet when compared with US is much more significant in India, where there is a 2 times increase of the animal protein and 1.7 times increase of the fat intake. We've been spending more on beverages and processed foods. And this is not only limited to the cities, it is also common in the patients, in the people in the rural areas. And thus, as a change of all these things, the India's per capita income, the per capita soft tissue, soft drink consumption is increasing. And the quick service restaurant market in India is growing because of increasing urbanization, rapid expansion of food delivery services, expanding young and working population, which is therefore resulting in an increased disease burden of IBD, as is evident by the maximum number of patients of ulcerative colitis in the country. So what can we do about this? It was said that every time we eat or drink, we are either feeding a disease or fighting it. And diet, as we know, is involved in both pathogenesis and treatment of IBD. So discussing the role of diet in pathogenesis of IBD, the previous Indian or the Mediterranean diet, which was rich in fruits and vegetables, had an impact on the microbial diversity. It improved the barrier function of the mucosa and resulted in immune tolerance. However, with the westernization, there is increased gut dysbiosis with impaired barrier function and increased immune disruption. So there are various factors in the diet which are associated with IBD. The first being refined sugars. Use of refined sugars and soft drinks can reduce the diversity of the colonic bacteria, which can result in disruption of the mucosal barrier and increase in the pro-inflammatory cytokine release. A study from Israel showed that pre-illness dietary factors in the IBD with an overall increased intake of total sugars, sucrose, and soft drinks was associated with increased incidence of ulcerative colitis. Similarly, in a multi-center case-controlled study of the risk factors for ulcerative colitis in China, heavy sugar consumption was one of the most important potential risk factor. Fats, we know there are 4 types of fats: saturated fat, unsaturated fatty acids, omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, and trans fat. Use of saturated fat results in increased taurine conjugation of the hepatic bile salts, which results in increased sulfate-reducing organisms, and this promotes pro-inflammatory T cell response. And omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids are anti-inflammatory, while the omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids are pro-inflammatory. The Nurses Health Study has shown that a higher intake of dietary long-chain omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids can be associated with a reduced risk of ulcerative colitis. And in contrast, trans unsaturated fatty acids was associated with an increased risk of ulcerative colitis. And the use of high dietary intake of specific fatty acids like myristic acid was also shown to be associated with increased risk of flares in patients with ulcerative colitis in remission. Red meat has also been associated with increase in the ulcerative colitis. This can be either because of the cooking method or the concurrent presence of saturated fat, or fermentation of meat-derived protein by the gut microflora, which produces ammonia, amines, hydrogen sulfide, and nitrous compounds, resulting in DNA breakdown and the genetic instability. This French study, which involved 67,000 patients and were followed up for 15 years prospectively, showed that the use of animal protein, especially red meat, increased the risk of development of ulcerative colitis. Similarly, a meta-analysis of 9 studies showed that there was increased risk of ulcerative colitis development with the use of red meat. Meat can also cause a progression of disease, and the increased use of meat and meat products, especially red meat, can result in disease flares. Food additives like emulsifiers, which are used to make the food more palatable, more softer, and more presentable, and nanoparticles, which are the food preservatives, can also result in development of IBD. But this is shown more so in the animal models, wherein the presence of these emulsifiers and nanoparticles can result in increased translocation of invasive E. coli and activation of inflammasome, which results in pro-inflammatory cytokine release and disruption of bacterial mucosal of the intestinal mucosal barrier, resulting in development of IBD. There are no human studies to support this data. This diagram summarizes the possible effects of dietary fibers on the host barrier and immunity, and the effects of dietary fibers on microbiota leading to IBD. Now, discussing the role of diet as a therapy in ulcerative colitis. There are favorable diet immune interactions with dietary fiber, zinc, and vitamin D. Dietary fiber acts as a substrate for the commensal bacteria, which break it down into butyrate, propionate, and acetate. And these short-chain fatty acids further result in strengthening of the mucosal barrier function, including a thick mucus layer production and promotion of the IgA production. It also decreases inflammatory cytokine production and suppresses the development, maturation, and function of inflammatory cells. There are 2 cohort studies, the Nurses Study 1 and the Nurses Study 2, which was from US, both of which have shown protective benefit of dietary fiber in Crohn's disease patients, but no such benefit has been seen in patients with ulcerative colitis. In a systematic review and meta-analysis assessing the association of dietary fiber, fruit and vegetable consumption with the risk of IBD, there was no significant association seen between the intake of dietary fiber and the risk of ulcerative colitis. Fiber in the treatment of IBD has also shown a very weak association. The next thing is zinc. Use of zinc in mouse models has been shown to reduce the severity of inflammatory colitis. Zinc has antioxidant properties, anti-inflammatory properties. It can suppress the reactive oxygen species, increase glutathione, suppress pro-inflammatory cytokines, activate the NRF2 pathway, enhance the efficacy of 5-ASAs, and restore dysbiosis. And if there is a deficiency of zinc, it is associated with increased risk of hospitalization and complications, both in ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. The next thing is vitamin D. Vitamin D, which is produced by exposure to sunlight or from dietary sources like fish, strengthens the epithelial barrier and tight junction protein expression. It decreases maturation and function of dendritic cells with subsequent decreased T cell activation, and also increases the proteobacteria and bacteroidetes and reduces the firmicutes. The higher levels of vitamin D status has been associated with reduced risk of Crohn's disease, but not ulcerative colitis. And vitamin D has also been shown, the lower levels of vitamin D have been shown to have an effect on the disease activity of ulcerative colitis. As discussed just now by Dr. Pavan, there are various dietary strategies for IBD. We can use enteral nutrition or elimination diets. However, such studies are very less in patients with ulcerative colitis. The role of enteral nutrition in acute severe ulcerative colitis has been described by very few studies. The first is from AIIMS. This was a randomized control trial recently published, which compared the exclusive enteral nutrition versus standard of care in patients with acute severe ulcerative colitis. In patients who were given EEN, the rate of steroid failure was significantly lower. The mean duration of hospitalization was significantly lower in this group as well. However, the rate of colectomy in both these groups was same. When a composite outcome of colectomy and repeated hospitalization was calculated, the EN group fared much better than the standard of care group. The use of EN also resulted in higher day 7 levels of protein albumin and lower levels of CRP at day 5. The lower levels of CRP and fecal calprotectin at the end of the therapy. Another case report from Dr. Costello's group, a 19 years old male with acute severe ulcerative colitis who was steroid non-responsive at day 3, received FMT 2 sessions and diet with increased intake of fermentable fibers, reduced intake of overall and sulfur-containing proteins, and restriction of sulfate and sulfide food additives, in addition to azathioprine and infliximab. And this patient showed a good response at day 2, clinical remission at week 4, a composite remission at week 8, which was maintained till week 52. So saying this, enteral nutrition may have a role in patients with acute severe ulcerative colitis. The role of eliminating foods in ulcerative colitis is also questionable. Most of the patients have their own dietary beliefs and practices, and a study from AIIMS has shown that a majority of patients tend to modify their diet once they're diagnosed with IBD. The most commonly restricted food is dairy products. Although animal models show that the exposure to casein increases the severity of colitis, there are no human studies to suggest the same. The risk of having a relapse on a milk-free diet versus normal diet was non-significant in adult patients in a randomized controlled trial conducted in 1965. And similarly, in children with ulcerative colitis, the cow's milk protein elimination diet had a similar clinical relapse rate as compared to the children on normal diet. In addition to lactose, there are other fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols, which form a component of the low FODMAP diet. A low FODMAP diet has been shown to improve the IBS-like symptoms of abdominal pain, diarrhea, bloating in patients with inflammatory bowel disease. However, as shown from this randomized controlled trial, although there is an improvement in the IBS scores, there is no significant differences of these diets on the disease activity in ulcerative colitis, as seen by the partial Mayo score, the CRP levels, fecal calprotectin, and there was no difference in the alpha and beta diversity or the phyla distribution at the end of this trial. Anti-inflammatory diet has also been used in patients with IBD in one study, which is mentioned as just an abstract. This study basically limited the use of red meat and recommended consumption of pre and probiotics, soluble fiber, and omega-3 fatty acids. There were no significant differences in relapse rate in the two groups. Use of carrageenans has shown to worsen the disease activity in ulcerative colitis. So to summarize, the use of diet in prevention and treatment of ulcerative colitis is a desired treatment strategy. Clinicians should have a good knowledge of specific diets which exert pro and anti-inflammatory actions in ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. The IO-IBD guidelines suggest increased intake of omega-3 fatty acids from fish and food, and reduced intake of red meat, processed meats, dairy fat, palm and coconut oil, saturated and trans fat, emulsifiers, graginins, artificial sweeteners, maltodextrins, and titanium dioxide. The limitations are that these are majorly epidemiological data. They do not correlate well with the disease activity, and the focus has been on food components and not dietary patterns and practices. So we need larger randomized controlled and prospective controlled studies, having a larger representative sample, studies which separately analyze patients with UC and CD, use standard definitions of remission and relapse outcomes, analyze dietary nutrients, food groups, dietary patterns and practices, and analyze the dietary changes as predictors of relapse. We also need to have fecal samples for assessing the dynamic changes in gut microbiome. These changes should help us to treat inflammatory bowel disease with an intelligently balanced diet. With this, I would end my talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Amit. It was quite an exhaustive talk and a quite elaborate one. And yes, as dietitians, we really feel empowered that diet can do wonders in all these things. And definitely the points which you have kept, that yes, there's a in the years gone by, like maybe in 1940s, 50s, the diet one used to have is not the same. And of course, the diseases are also not the same. So all these diseases are also flaring up because of the, faulty dietary patterns. Some of these are in our hands. Some of these are not in our hands. For example, millets used to be staple in 1940s, 50s. Now we have wheat and rice. So millets is just like now it has to be introduced again. And secondly, the processed things were not there in those times. Now there's so many processed items. So all this is leading to whatever we are facing nowadays, and IBD is one of them. Thanks a ton. Over to Namrata.
You have to unmute yourself, Namrata.
Good afternoon, everybody. And it was indeed a pleasure to listen to both the talks on diet in ulcerative colitis and diet in Crohn's disease. And both the talks were very informative. And now we should initiate the discussion. And if we have any questions, we can take them. And I think we have one question where somebody is asked that what is the role of adding curcumin in the diet of these patients. So if our speakers could throw a little bit more light on this.
Actually, we didn't include curcumin. I mean, I request Dr. Amit though, because whatever data on curcumin is there in the UC, there have been, I was surprised to see that there are 4 randomized controlled trials on curcumin around 3 grams per day. And if I can add, Dr. Amit, basically one trial could show the improvement. It showed the remission also. It showed the decrease in CRP and ESR also. Of the interest, I could read that trial. But then later on, there is a systemic review also available, which probably refutes this. Yes. So the verdict on curcumin is still not out. I mean, there were some GI side effects on these doses because the 3 grams per day you have to take. People experience some nausea, vomiting, and discomforts also. We need further data till now. Whatever trials there are in UC, and the results are not still favoring the use of curcumin.
And I would like to add to this that maybe the person who's asked the question, please don't confuse with curcumin and haldi. Curcumin is the extract, the active extract that has been taken from the haldi. So for day-to-day use, if you're using haldi, it's good. But using the extract in the amount that has been used in studies, that is like debatable.
I would just request, because we have so learned dietitian, we are blessed to have you all. Is there any pattern of prescribing curcumin in both the institutes, AIIMS and PGI, and maybe the DMC as well?
We are not prescribing curcumin as the active component or tools, but we do ask our patients to continue with taking spices in their diet. This is a very common notion and myth that patients, they will be eating a boiled diet, they will not be adding oil to food, they would not be adding spices to food. So hence the food becomes very unpalatable and difficult to eat. So we tell the patients to take a diet which has spices. So we do ask them to add haldi to it, and also the other spices. If any of my other co-chair would like to add to this, please do.
Yeah, so basically, of course, we don't want patients to go in for boiled food. So the mere fact that we allow patients to have enough oil in their diet, be it refined or small amount of even butter or ghee, adds to the palatability. But definitely, turmeric is something that we ask them to, use as much as they can. And I somehow would like to go ask the patients to go easy on some chili, because most of them do experience symptoms with the increased intake of chili in their diet. And I have a question for you, Dr. Rawal. You mentioned specific carbohydrate diet. Do you have any experience with that in your institute? Because I, as a dietitian, feel personally that it wouldn't be easy for a patient to, follow this diet, and not even easy for a dietitian to prescribe one, because she has to give options to the patients if she asks one to go on a diet.
No, definitely, I agree. We have IBD clinic and we have a dietitian, but then I totally agree. The removing the grains and giving only the vegetable, fruits, and yogurt. I mean, this is very difficult, and more so, it's difficult for the patient also to follow. And the follow-ups are not that great also. I mean, people don't visit every week or 2 weekly. They come very. I mean, I totally agree. Even the CD, ED also is not that easy to take care. Though that is favoring because it is at least practical. So I totally agree with this. It's difficult to prescribe and follow both the things.
So you haven't done that, right, with your patients?
We probably, I mean, we try to educate people about the restrictions rather than just fixing exactly as the kind of partial and CDD together. But then general advice is also given to avoid those fruits and vegetables or those grains or which can quickly precipitate the stuff. And it's general advice that's given rather than a strict the specific carbohydrate diet.
So we've been very well within the time allotted to us. And I would just like to wrap up this session by saying that the importance of nutrition in IBD has been highlighted by our organizers of this webinar also. They have put it as the first talk after the inauguration. So we can see how important the role of nutrition is in IBD. And if I have to sum up and say that what should be a diet of these patients presently with the data that we have, I would say it should be a balanced, normal, home-based diet where we are not using any fancy preservatives and, stored food. So it is a normal, healthy, balanced, home-cooked food. With this, I would like to end
I would like to give one more this thing: eat right now, and move your body, because exercise is also anti-inflammatory. So it's very important. It is, I mean, to move your body, to be physically active, and to eat right now. That should be the message.
So as long as our patients of IBD, UC, and CD are in remission, please give them a normal, healthy, balanced diet as the other family members are eating. Just no restrictions to be applied.
Namita, since we have another minute, there is one question from the audience, right? So it says they're asking for cost-effective EEN options for Indian scenario, as Modulin is not easily available in India. So would you like to comment on that, Dr. Rawal?
Actually, it's costly. I mean, there are cases where we need to give polymeric because the EEN is, at least in pediatrics, it's very difficult to be, afford for a person. So one pack would be something around 2,000, 2,500, if I'm right. So it's difficult, it's costly, but as we already discussed, go for a polymeric formula, go for indigenous stuff. I mean, the dietitian, they need to be trained about the indigenous stuff, almost replicating those formula. The polymeric ones are cheaper. They're really cheaper than the at least elemental one. So, and the data also favors that polymeric, they are easy to start, they are palatable, and they can be taken easily. So prefer polymeric formula. They are much cheaper than the elemental. So yes, otherwise EN is costly. It's not, at least for a general population, it's difficult.
So most polymeric formulae would fit into the EM.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. Thank you so much, all the speakers, and thank you, Nancy and Namrata, for being co-chairs. Over to you, Dr. Vishal, for the next session. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, chairpersons and speakers. I'm Dr. Anupam, and our next session